All right, welcome to today's Explainer. We're doing a bit of time travel today, stepping all the way back to ancient Athens. But listen, this isn't exactly the Athens you might be picturing in your head right now. Before those sweeping marble temples, way before the great philosophers, and definitely before their world-famous democracy, Athens was a city literally on the verge of tearing itself apart. So today we're going to explore the life of a man who stepped right into that utter chaos. And the crazy thing, he didn't do it with a sword. He did it with a profound sense of justice and, believe it or not, some incredibly well-crafted poetry. We're looking at Solon, the true architect of Athens.
It's just an incredible puzzle, right? I mean, how exactly did a moderate merchant, a guy who outright refused absolute power when it was literally handed to him on a silver platter, end up building a political and legal system that lasted for centuries? That right there is the central mystery of our explainer today. As you'll see, we're going to uncover how moderation, rather than extreme measures, actually built the ancient world that we so revere today. Part 1. The Mad Poet's Rise. Let's dive right in and look at Solon's early years. So, born around 638 BC, Solon wasn't exactly some untouchable high society aristocrat. His father had actually totally ruined the family estate through, well, being way too generous. Because of that, Solon actually had to work for a living. He became a merchant, traveling all over the place and experiencing different foreign customs. But crucially, he was also a poet. He wrote these beautiful verses on virtue and political justice, which actually earned him a massive reputation as one of the 7 sages of archaic Greece. But his rise to real, undeniable prominence comes with an anecdote that is it's absolutely fantastic. So picture this. Athens had been losing this long, bitter war with Megara over the island of Salamis. The Athenian assembly was so incredibly demoralized that they passed a law stating anyone who even proposed renewing the campaign for Salamis would be put to death, no exceptions. Well, Solon thought this was an absolute disgrace, but how do you rouse an entire city without getting yourself executed? His solution was brilliant. He faked insanity. He memorized a deeply inflammatory 100-line poem, slapped on a special cap, which back then was the universal recognized sign of madness, meaning that deadly law didn't apply to him, ran straight into the marketplace, and dramatically recited these exact verses to the crowd. I am a herald come from Salamis the fair. My news from thence my verses shall declare. It was basically the ancient equivalent of pleading the fifth via performance art, and it worked. The performance was so stirring that Athens actually revoked the law, put Solon in charge, and he went out and won the island back using this incredibly brilliant trap. So think about this. Even before holding any official political office whatsoever, Solon was already the most respected man in the entire city. He had just won Athens its first major military triumph, but he also proved his diplomatic and moral weight by negotiating the Cylonian pollution crisis. This was a really messy, deeply religious and political crisis involving murders at a sacred altar. Solon stepped in, helped arrange the trials, and oversaw the purification of the city. He basically became the go-to guy. He was the man Athens called when things seemed entirely hopeless. Part 2. A city on the brink. Let's look at why Athens was in such a deep crisis. Now, what's really interesting here is the sheer scale of the socioeconomic disaster Athens was facing. The disparity between the wealthy and the destitute had reached its absolute breaking point. The city was completely irreparably polarized. On one side, you had the radical rich. They were benefiting immensely from the current system, and naturally, they just wanted business as usual. On the exact opposite end, you had the radical poor. They were suffering immensely and demanded what they called Spartan equality, basically a total radical redistribution of all the land. Both extremes were so deeply dug in that practically everyone in the city felt handing things over to a despotic power, a tyrant, was the only possible way out of the deadlock.
And things were bleak. If you think modern debt is stressful, imagine a system where missing a payment literally meant selling your own children. All the common people were heavily indebted to the rich. If they couldn't pay up, they were forced into becoming hectomori. This meant they had to till their own land for their creditors and hand over a sixth of their yield. If they defaulted entirely, they could be seized, sold into slavery at home or abroad, and, incredibly, some were even forced to sell their own family members. So the crucial point to understand is that in 594 BC, Solon was elected archon, which was essentially the chief magistrate, with full authority to completely rewrite Athenian law. And he was chosen precisely because he was trusted by neither extreme. The poor knew he hadn't profited from their misery, and the rich knew he hadn't joined in with the popular mobs. He was the ultimate neutral party.
Part 3. Refusing the tyrant's chair. This gets to the emotional core of our story. With this supreme, unchecked power handed right to him,
Everyone, even his closest friends, expected him to just seize absolute power. I mean, neighboring cities all had tyrants, and his friends assured him he would have massive popular support if he took over. But he refused. Absolutely not. In his poems, he openly defended this choice, writing, "That I spared my land, and withheld from usurpation and from violence my hand, and forbore to fix a stain and a disgrace on my good name. I regret not. I believe that it will be my chiefest fame." Solon possessed the incredible foresight to realize that the tyrant's chair was a beautiful spot, sure, but there was absolutely no way down from it. Once you climbed up to absolute despotic power, you could never safely return to being an ordinary citizen. He valued his citizenship and the rule of law far more than he valued absolute control. Part 4. Shaking off the burdens. Let's take a look at his legislative toolkit. So this is how Solon sets out to fix the debt crisis, and what he does next literally changes history. His very first massive reform was the seisachtheia, which wonderfully translates to the shaking off. Imagine carrying this intolerable, crushing physical burden on your back, and someone finally, mercifully lets you put it down. That's exactly what this law was. It canceled all existing debts of the poor and completely abolished the practice of debt bondage forever. No Athenian could ever again be enslaved for failing to pay a debt. Huge, right? But while he was designing this absolute masterstroke, he faced a really devastating betrayal. Solon actually confided his secret plan to cancel the debts, but not redistribute the land, to 3 of his close friends. And what did they do? They used this inside information to rush out, borrow massive sums of money, and buy up huge farms. When the law finally passed, their massive debts were wiped clean, but they got to keep all the land. It was essentially the world's first recorded instance of massive insider trading. As you can imagine, this insider trading scandal nearly destroyed Solon's reputation overnight. People naturally assumed he was in on the scam with his buddies. To prove his innocence, Solon did something astonishing. He publicly released his own personal debtors from obligations totaling 5 talents. To put that into perspective, 5 talents was a staggering, vast sum of personal wealth. He forgave all of it out of his own pocket just to clear his name. It cements a timeless lesson in leadership. When you are going to legislate against private gain, you absolutely must be the first person to forgo it yourself. And the result of this moderate, middle-of-the-road approach? Well, nobody was entirely happy. The rich were absolutely furious about losing all their debt money, and the poor were angry they didn't get that total land redistribution they'd been demanding. But Solon deeply understood human nature and politics. When people grumbled and complained, he didn't try to claim he had given Athens the perfect laws. Instead, he simply said he had given them the best they could receive, meaning the best laws they could actually handle without completely tearing their own city apart. Part 5. A new political foundation. Restructuring by wealth. This is brilliant. Instead of the old aristocratic system that was based purely on noble birth, Solon graded political power by income. He wanted to ensure everyone had at least some stake in the game. So he divided the citizens into 4 distinct classes based on the annual agricultural yield of their land. At the very top were the Pentacosiomedimni, who were eligible for any office. Then came the hippies, the horsemen, then the Zougetae. But the true genius of Solon's system sits right down at the bottom, the Thets. Even though they made less than 200 bushels and couldn't hold executive office, Solon gave them the right to vote in the assembly. And, crucially, he gave them the right to sit as jurors in the courts. This single right, the ability of the common, everyday citizen to judge legal cases, became the absolute engine of future Athenian democracy. Now, beyond just the political structure, Solon fired off dozens of fascinating social laws. He forbade dowries because he wanted marriages to be based on genuine affection, not just wealth. He created the very first law allowing childless citizens to write wills. He restricted flashy, over-the-top public mourning, and he strictly forbade speaking ill of the dead. But perhaps his most profound law of all was this. He disenfranchised any citizen who remained neutral during a political crisis. That is wild, right? Solon firmly believed that citizens must have skin in the game. The city couldn't rely on your loyalty if you just sat on the sidelines safely while it went through its moment of greatest need. Part 6. The Lawgiver's Enduring Legacy. Solon's Grand Departure. Having completely rewritten the foundational rules of Athenian society, Solon quickly realized that his mere physical presence in the city was becoming a liability. People were constantly coming up to him, seeking exceptions, asking for clarifications, or trying to reinterpret the rules. To protect his laws, he did the unthinkable. He had to leave.
He asked the Athenians for leave to travel on his merchant business for 10 years. He basically engaged in self-exile, traveling to Egypt and Cyprus just to ensure the laws could establish their own authority independent of him. The real tragedy, however, is what happened upon his return. Now an old man, Solon arrived back in Athens, only to find his own cousin, Pisistratus, maneuvering to seize the exact same tyranny that Solon had so nobly refused decades prior. Solon warned the assembly, but they just didn't listen to him, and he had to watch his cousin take the citadel.
But you know what? Solon really had the last laugh of history. Even though Pisistratus took power in 561 BC, the tyrant actually preserved the Cylonian legal framework. It was that good. Solon's careful adjustments were so fundamentally sound that they survived his death, outlasted the tyrants, and laid the literal groundwork for Cleisthenes' democratic reforms in 508 BC. By the 5th century BC, when the famous Pericles opened the popular courts, he was building directly on the foundation Solon had laid with the Thetes. Solon's laws were simply good enough to grow with the times. Which leaves us with this rather provocative thought as we wrap things up today. Solon saw the crisis of his city not as a fatal problem requiring some radical, violent surgery, but rather as one needing careful, humane adjustment. He suffered the deep disappointment of practically all moderate reformers. He was hated by extremes on both sides in his own time, yet his careful framework birthed democracy as we know it. It really makes you wonder, in leadership and in society, are the perfect solutions actually the dangerous ones? And are the truly enduring laws just the messy, necessary compromises, simply the best we can receive? Well, something to think about. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. I really hope it gave you a fresh new lens on how moderation actually built the ancient world. See you next time.